Story 1. Story 1, The Whispering Pines. The annual Carter family camping trip was supposed to be a bonding experience. 7 of us crammed into 2 cars, brimming with coolers, tents, and forced enthusiasm. I wasn't particularly outdoorsy, preferring the comforting glow of my laptop screen to the scratchy embrace of nature, but family obligations, you know? The designated campsite, nestled deep in the whispering pines of Blackwood Forest, seemed idyllic enough in the waning afternoon light. "Perfect spot, Dad!" Liam, my overly enthusiastic younger brother, declared, already wrestling with the tent poles. Dad, ever the pragmatic one, grunted in agreement, while Mom busied herself unpacking. Aunt Carol and Uncle Mike, their faces etched with a familiar marital tension, set up their own tent a significant distance away. My cousin, Sarah, glued to her phone, offered the occasional grunt of acknowledgement when spoken to. Typical. As dusk settled, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, a strange stillness descended upon the forest. The usual chirping of crickets and rustle of leaves were replaced by a heavy silence, punctuated only by the crackling of our campfire. The air grew thick and cold, a dampness clinging to my skin like a second layer. "Anyone else feel weird?" I asked, breaking the uneasy silence. Liam scoffed. "Weird how?" "I don't know. Just off," I mumbled, pulling my fleece tighter around me. No one else seemed bothered, their attention focused on the roasting marshmallows. Later, huddled in my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The darkness felt oppressive, pressing in on me from all sides. I could hear the whispers of the pines, a low, rustling murmur that seemed to grow louder with every passing minute. I tried to rationalize it, blaming the wind, but there wasn't a breeze. Then, I heard it. A distinct snap of a twig, just outside my tent. My heart hammered against my ribs. I held my breath, straining to hear more. Another snap, closer this time. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to believe it was just an animal. But then came the laughter. A low, guttural chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't human. It was something else. I scrambled out of my tent, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The others were still asleep, oblivious to the growing dread that called in my stomach. The laughter echoed again, closer now, seeming to come from the dense undergrowth just beyond the firelight's reach. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. Only the whispering pines. I scanned the surrounding trees, my flashlight beam dancing nervously across the gnarled branches. Nothing. Just the oppressive darkness and the unsettling stillness. Back in my tent, I lay rigid, every rustle, every snap, amplifying my fear. The laughter didn't return, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I could feel it, a palpable presence just beyond the thin fabric of my tent, a cold, malevolent gaze burning into me. At dawn, the forest seemed transformed. The oppressive darkness had lifted, replaced by a bright, almost cheerful sunlight. The pines swayed gently in a soft breeze, their whispers now sounding almost friendly. "You okay, MIA?" Mom asked, noticing the dark circles under my eyes. "Just a bad dream," I mumbled, not wanting to sound crazy. But it wasn't a dream. I knew it. The others packed up, their chatter filling the morning air. I tried to shake off the lingering unease, telling myself it was just my overactive imagination. But then, as we were pulling away, I saw it. Scratched into the bark of a towering pine, just beyond where my tent had been, was a symbol. A crude, unsettling symbol unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It looked like a circle with 3 lines extending downwards, almost like claws. I pointed it out to Liam, but he just shrugged it off as some kid's graffiti. No one else seemed to notice it, or maybe they just didn't want to. We drove away, leaving Blackwood Forest behind. But the feeling of unease didn't leave me. It stayed with me, a cold, gnawing presence in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't left Blackwood Forest behind. That it, or something within it, had followed us home. The whispering pines, the chilling laughter, the symbol carved into the tree, they haunt me still. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can hear it again. The soft, rustling murmur of the pines, whispering my name. Story 2. Story 2, The Whispering Pines. The crackling campfire cast long, dancing shadows that swallowed the edges of our campsite whole. We were deep in the Pisgah National Forest, miles from any semblance of civilization, celebrating Mark's 30th birthday. The air, sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth, carried the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. "Another beer, Sarah?" Mark asked, holding up the cooler. I shook my head, already feeling the pleasant drowsiness of the evening creeping in. "I'm good," I said, snuggling deeper into my fleece jacket. "Think I'll turn in soon?" Mark grinned. "Suit yourself. Don't let the bears bite." He nudged Emily, his wife, who chuckled and tossed a pinecone into the fire, sending a shower of sparks spiraling upwards. The forest felt peaceful, almost maternal. But as the fire died down to embers, a subtle shift occurred. The comforting chirping of crickets seemed to intensify, becoming almost deafening. A low, rustling sound came from the thick undergrowth beyond our campsite perimeter. "What was that?" Emily asked, her voice a little strained. Mark shrugged. "Probably a deer. Or a raccoon." He sounded confident, but I noticed he was scanning the darkness with a newfound alertness. I tried to shake off the unease that was starting to prickle my skin. It was just the woods settling down for the night, I told myself. But the rustling continued, growing closer, coupled with a faint snapping of twigs. It sounded deliberate. "I'm going to check it out," Mark announced, grabbing a heavy branch from the fire pit. "Stay here." "Mark, don't," Emily whispered, her hand gripping his arm. But he'd already gone, disappearing into the oppressive blackness beyond the firelight. We waited, listening to the rustling and snapping, punctuated by Mark's occasional muttered curses as he navigated the dense undergrowth. The sound seemed to be circling us, closing in. Emily and I huddled together, our breaths catching in our throats. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every rustle, every snap, felt charged with malevolence. Then, the sound stopped. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed down on us like a physical weight. "Mark?" Emily called out, her voice trembling. No answer. "Mark," she shouted again, louder this time, her voice cracking with fear. Still nothing. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. We called for Mark again and again, our voices growing increasingly frantic, but the only response was the whispering of the wind through the pine trees, a sound that now seemed sinister, mocking. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm going to look for him," I said, my voice shaking. Emily grabbed my hand, her eyes wide with terror. "No. Don't leave me alone." I understood her fear, but the thought of Mark out there alone, possibly injured or, worse, was unbearable. I pricked up a burning branch from the embers, the flickering flames offering little comfort against the vast darkness. "Stay here," I whispered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'll be back." I ventured into the darkness, the burning branch casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to twist and writhe before my eyes. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and slippery pine needles. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the silence became. It was a silence that swallowed sound, a silence that felt wrong. I called out for Mark, my voice echoing eerily through the trees. No answer. Only the whispering of the pines. A whispering that seemed to grow louder, closer, as if the trees themselves were speaking, murmuring secrets I couldn't understand. Suddenly, a flash of movement in the periphery of my vision. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Just the endless rows of dark trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I pushed on, deeper into the woods, the fear tightening its grip on my chest. Then, I saw it. A flicker of light, faint and distant, deep within the trees. Could it be Mark? Hope surged through me, momentarily eclipsing the fear. I stumbled towards the light, pushing through the undergrowth, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a small clearing. And then I saw what was making the light. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't a campfire. It was something else. Something I couldn't comprehend. Something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. The whispering of the pines intensified, swirling around me like a vortex of sound. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, my eyes fixed on the unnatural light, my mind reeling from what I was seeing. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I shouldn't have come. That I should have stayed by the dying embers of the fire. That some things are best left unseen, unknown. The whispering grew louder, closer, the words becoming clearer, forming a chilling phrase that echoed through the trees, through my mind, through my very being. Turn back. Turn back. He's already ours. My breath hitched in my throat. The light pulsed, beckoning me closer, while the whispering warned me away. I stood there, paralyzed, trapped between the unknown horror in the clearing and the chilling certainty that something terrible had happened to Mark. The burning branch slipped from my numb fingers, falling to the ground with a soft thud, plunging me into darkness. And the whispering continued, a constant, chilling reminder of the horror I had stumbled upon, the horror that awaited me in the heart of the whispering pines. I don't know what happened next. I don't know if I ran, or if I stayed. All I remember is the darkness, the whispering, and the chilling certainty that I was not alone. And I'm still not. Story 3. Story 3, The Whispering Pines. The crackling fire cast long, dancing shadows on the canvas of our tent. Pine needles crunched under Liam's boots as he returned from gathering more firewood. "Anything interesting out there?" I asked, zipping my sleeping bag a little higher. The chill of the Appalachian night was seeping in, despite the fire. "Nah, just the usual. Owls hooting. Crickets chirping. The occasional rustle in the undergrowth," he replied, tossing a few logs onto the flames. "This place is eerily quiet, though. Like it's holding its breath." Liam and I had been backpacking through the Pisgah National Forest for a week, enjoying the solitude and the challenging trails. We'd ventured deeper than we usually did, lured by the promise of an untouched waterfall marked on a tattered old map we'd found in a dusty antique shop. We shared a laugh over the map's cryptic clues, dismissing the shopkeeper's warning about the whispering pines as local folklore. But now, sitting here in the heart of the forest, enveloped by an unnatural stillness, his words echoed in my mind. An hour passed, filled with idle chatter and the comforting crackle of the fire. But the silence beyond the firelight felt heavy, oppressive. A low, rhythmic thrumming began to vibrate through the ground, barely perceptible at first, but steadily growing stronger. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice tight with apprehension. Liam frowned, listening intently. "Hear what? The wind?" "No, it's a pulsing. Like a heartbeat, but vast." He shook his head, dismissing my concern. But the pulsing continued, intermingled now with a faint, high-pitched whine that seemed to bore into my skull. The trees surrounding our campsite seemed to sway, although there was no wind. Their shadows writhed and twisted, taking on strange, unnatural shapes. Suddenly, Liam froze, his eyes wide with terror. He pointed towards the edge of the clearing. "Look!" I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. A faint, phosphorescent glow emanated from the trees, slowly coalescing into a swirling mist that drifted towards us. Within the mist, I could make out shapes, shifting, amorphous forms that defied description. "What the hell is that?" Liam stammered, scrambling to his feet. Terror seized me, paralyzing me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The whining intensified, a piercing, otherworldly sound that resonated deep within my bones. The pulsing became a thunderous roar, shaking the very ground beneath us. The mist reached the edge of the firelight, and the temperature plummeted. The flames flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The shadows around us seemed to deepen, to solidify. I felt something brush against my arm, something cold and slimy. I recoiled in horror, letting out a strangled cry. Liam grabbed my hand, his grip tight. "Run," he yelled, his voice thick with panic. We stumbled through the darkness, branches clawing at our faces, the ground uneven and treacherous beneath our feet. The whining sound pursued us, growing louder, more insistent. The pulsing was now a physical force, pushing against us, trying to hold us back. I glimpsed movement in the trees, dark shapes flitting through the undergrowth, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The air grew thick with a sickly sweet smell, like decaying flesh. Liam tripped and fell, pulling me down with him. We scrambled to our feet, but we were surrounded. The mist enveloped us, swirling and coiling around us like a living thing. The shapes within it grew clearer, more defined. They were things that defied the laws of nature, things that should not exist. Their forms were a grotesque mockery of life, twisted and malformed. Their eyes burned with a cold, alien intelligence. They reached for us, their long, skeletal fingers dripping with an oily black substance. Liam screamed, a raw, animalistic sound. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The whining ceased. The pulsing faded. The mist dissipated. I opened my eyes, blinking in the dim light of the returning moon. We were alone. The forest was silent, still. The only sound was the frantic beating of our hearts. We lay there for a long time, too terrified to move, too shocked to speak. Finally, Liam whispered, What was that?" I shook my head, unable to answer. I didn't know. I still don't know. We stumbled back to our campsite, packed our gear, and fled. We didn't speak about what we'd seen, what we'd experienced. We haven't spoken about it since. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear it again, the faint, high-pitched whine, the rhythmic pulsing. And I see them in my dreams, the shapes in the mist, the things that should not exist. I know they're still out there, waiting. Waiting in the whispering pines. Waiting for us to return. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that someday we will.